Number 1. Final Fantasy V Pixel Remaster. Final Fantasy XVI main scenario writer Kazutoya Mihiro says, "If we're thinking about the foundational themes of the gameplay, let's make Final Fantasy V into an action game. Rather than thinking of a job change system, better to imagine the ability customization system." Final Fantasy XVI director Hiroshi Takai follows up and says, "Instead of jobs, we included the icons as a base. These days, there's a lot of enthusiasm for players broadcasting and streaming their games. So, if different streamers have different loadout combinations, we think it gives the viewers an opportunity to go, oh, that kind of combination exists too, huh? In this way, we wanted to develop a game that plays differently for every player, to the extent that we're able. As the story progresses, the options that you can use will increase, but within that context, you're free to set them up how you like. Obviously, we're trying to avoid a situation where it's clear that this is the right answer, but rather where everyone can reflect on their own preferences in how they play." Mihiro says, "Honestly, even as we play through the game, the staff's various setups are really all over the place. So, Bart's from Final Fantasy V in a real-time action game might be an easy way to get the idea of it." Now, Final Fantasy V is known for its job class system, and it's clear that this entry was used as a starting point of inspiration for Final Fantasy XVI. In fact, Final Fantasy V was the first Final Fantasy that Hiroshi Takai worked on, and it was directly involved with the team in charge of combat. As Mihiro and Takai discussed in this interview, mixing and matching jobs and abilities is the main appeal of Final Fantasy V. You could have a black mage who could use the jump ability, or a knight who can use white magic. Thinking of Final Fantasy XVI, it looks like Clive will be able to equip 2 or maybe 3 icon abilities at one time. Imagine matching up the range of Ramuh, then closing the gap with the speed of Garuda and the power of Titan when up close with the enemy. It also looks as if you'll earn ability points just as you can with Final Fantasy V to level up icon abilities and strengthen them. I'm so excited to mess around with the many different combinations, and just as it was in Final Fantasy V, this type of gameplay customization will encourage replayability, especially in the confirmed New Game Plus mode where abilities and level carry over. You can play Final Fantasy V Pixel Remaster today on Steam, or wait for the console release currently scheduled for spring 2023, possibly April 20th according to PlayAsia.com. While you wait, here's a few more games that you can play before June 22nd. Number 2. Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward. Yoshida himself has said that those who enjoyed Heavensward, the story of Final Fantasy XVI, will likely appeal to them. Heavensward was Kazutoya Mihiro's latest credit as main scenario writer before working on Final Fantasy XVI. Mihiro worked on both A Realm Reborn and Heavensward, yet it is important for me to note that the writing in Heavensward is leaps and bounds better than A Realm Reborn because that was the reset and rebuild of a game in its story. So, Heavensward is where Mihiro really shines as a writer. Hiroshi Takai worked as assistant director on the revival of Final Fantasy XIV and its first expansion, Heavensward. Takai became one of Yoshida's most trusted colleagues, and Yoshida put him in charge of Final Fantasy XVI as the director. All the character art that you see for Final Fantasy XVI may look familiar in style to you because 16's character designer Kazuha Takahashi also provided his talents for Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XVI's localization director, Michael Christopher Koji Fox, served as the localization director for Final Fantasy XIV. And with Final Fantasy XVI, Koji Fox's role will carry even more importance as 16 was performed in English first and then translated to Japanese, a first for the series. Here's an interesting quote. Mihiro says, quote, "The Holy Empire of Sanbreque is a strict theocracy, which acts only according to the teachings of its religion. Put it another way, it's a country that will immediately and completely act according to any new prophecy or teaching from its god." Its leader also appeared in the trailer, and that is Dion's father. For people who have played Final Fantasy XIV, if you imagine Ishgard, you will have essentially the right idea, end quote. Now, MMORPGs may not be for everyone. It wasn't for me, no matter how hard I tried to force myself to love it. Regardless, Final Fantasy XIV is an investment of both time and money, but the millions of active players speaks volumes as to why it is certainly worth a try. Because perhaps you haven't heard, but you can download the expanded free trial of the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV and play through the entirety of A Realm Reborn and the award-winning Heaven's Word expansion up to level 60 for free with no restrictions on playtime. Number 3. Final Fantasy Tactics: The War of the Lions. Kazutoya Mihiro worked on Tactics as the event planner. Final Fantasy XVI's localization director Michael Christopher Koji Fox also worked on the translations for Tactics. Final Fantasy XVI's art director Hiroshi Minagawa's first Final Fantasy gig was Tactics. He would go on to serve as Final Fantasy XII's visual design director and later Final Fantasy XIV expansions. The setting of Ivalice is very near and dear to the hearts of the Final Fantasy XVI team, with many having their hands on in the creation of Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Final Fantasy XII. With Final Fantasy XVI returning to the high fantasy setting with nations on the brink of all-out war, Tactics will give you a glimpse at what you can expect. A very rated M story that managed to secure a teen rating only because of its isometric pixel graphics and dialogue boxes. You will witness on-screen deaths by impalement, betrayals, rape, torture. Without getting into spoilers for Tactics, I predict that Final Fantasy XVI will use the crystals and the church in a similar manner shown in Tactics. I recommend playing this to get your mindset adjusted to Kazutoya Mihiro's. Also, it's one of the best Final Fantasy games of all time. Final Fantasy Tactics: War of the Lions can be purchased and downloaded on your phone for $14. Or if you have the means to play PSP games or the original PS1 game, just go for it. Here's hoping for that rumored remake. Number 4. Dragon's Dogma, Dark Arisen, and Devil May Cry 5. Final Fantasy XVI's battle director Ryota Suzuki worked as game design lead on Dragon's Dogma. This game has a stronger focus on RPG aspects than Devil May Cry 5. The combat has a focus on hitting weak points. You can actually grab a hold of bosses and scale them to reach that weak point. It's a pretty fun game, and Dragon's Dogma features some similarities to what we know of Final Fantasy XVI, like there's job classes called vocations. Your party members are called pawns and they're AI controlled. And Capcom targeted Western audiences, taking inspiration from Western RPGs as well as Capcom's own Devil May Cry. But think Devil May Cry blended with the methodical action of a Soulsborne and you'll have the idea of what you can expect in Dragon's Dogma. Ryota Suzuki contributed to Devil May Cry 5's excellent battle mechanics. There seems to be a striking resemblance to what we've seen of Final Fantasy XVI's combat. I think we'll get a mix of the frenetic and stylish combat of Devil May Cry 5 with a bit of the RPG elements of Dragon's Dogma wrapped up in a nice, neat Final Fantasy package. Final Fantasy fans have already gotten a taste of how cool these games can look in action with Final Fantasy VII Remake when you play as Tifa. So I think we are ready for smoking sexy style combos with Clive in Final Fantasy XVI. You can't go wrong with Devil May Cry 5. It is an extremely fun game in both gameplay and story, and you can get it on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox consoles. Last up at number 5 is The Last Remnant Remastered. This is Hiroshi Takai's first time as director. And that's all I got on that one. I've never played it myself, and it is literally on my list to do. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like, subscribe, and please share because we are trying to get a review code of Final Fantasy XVI to provide you with the best possible coverage. Thank you so much for watching. Take care now. Bye-bye.